We will begin this afternoon with the refuge prayer as in previous days. O sangye chudan sogi chodam la chancho bardo dani chabsumje dagi jin sogi besanamje drola penjir sanje drobar sho Sanje chedan tsogi chonam la chanjo bardo dani gyabsum che dagi jinso ki pe suanam ji drola penjir sanje drobar sho Sanje chedan tsogi chonam la chanjo bardo dani chabsum je dagi jinso gi pe sunam je drola penjir sanje drobar sho senjen tamje dewa tang Dewe judan dembro juji donga tan donga ji judan rawar juji donga mebe dewa tamba tam min rawar juji nyerin shadani tan rawi tanyon shambola nebro juji The Dharma Expanse Palace of Akanishta is the essence of all Buddhas of the three times who shows me directly in my mind is Dharmakaya. I prostrate to the glorious root Guru. Please bless me and all sentient beings that our minds become the Dharma. Bless us that the Dharma become the path. Bless us that the path dispel confusion. Bless us that confusion arise as wisdom. So now think to yourself that we are listening to the Dharma this afternoon, listening and teaching the Dharma this afternoon in order to bring all of our mothers, all sentient beings throughout space to the state of lasting happiness. And the only true state of lasting happiness is the state of Buddhahood. Whatever name we want to call it, it is the state of Buddhahood. And in order to bring other sentient beings to that state of Buddhahood, we also need to achieve the state of Buddhahood ourselves. And in order to achieve the state of Buddhahood, we have to engage in listening, contemplating, and meditating. And so today we are engaging in the activity of listening. And so please listen with this motivation this afternoon. The Dharma that we are listening to is Vasubandhu's verses on the Treasury of Abhidharma as explained by the Ninth Karmapa Wangchuk Dorje in his commentary, Youthful Play, and of the 8 areas of the Treasury that we are talking about the third of the 8, the teachings on the world. In other words, a teaching on the truth of suffering. And this teaching on the world has 2 parts: the world of sentient beings and the world that contains them. In other words, there is the external world is often called a container. Like Nut is the Tibetan word. It's like the external container and environment. Then you've got the contents of that. So you've got like your basket and all the contents, or you've got your world, and then you've got the environment and its inhabitants. So first we're talking about the world of sentient beings, the inhabitants of the environments. And the world of sentient beings has 5 topics: the classification of wanderers who are born, the nature of interdependence, the manner of birth. The third is the conditions for abiding after birth. And the fourth is the minds of staying and dying. And E is categorizing, the 5th, letter E here, categorizing beings in 3 groups. And of these 5, we are still talking about the first. So in the classifications of wanderers who are born, that has 3 topics. So there are 3 parts to that, classifying in the 3 realms, classifying wanderers in 5, and classifying in the 4 modes of birth. And so in terms of these 3 sections, we have discussed the first and the second, we're still in the second when you talk about classifying the wanderers in 5. There are three topics, the actual and the particulars. Oh, wait a minute, no, I'm skipping ahead, sorry. Oh, no, we went through that. Where did we get to? Ah, yes, here we are. So we have got to the classifying wanderers in 5 says 3 topics, the actual, the particulars, the elements, and the elaborations on these points. In other words, the actual is talking about how there are 5 wanderers. The particulars, the elements, is talking about how they are unafflicted and neutral. And then the third part is the elaboration of the points, and this is what we're speaking about now. This is talking about the 7 places of consciousness, the 9 places for beings, and then once again 4 places for consciousness. And then talking about how these work together. The fourth section of this is analyzing the 4 possibilities of the 4 places and 7 places. So when we talk about this here, we're getting a lot of detail. And particularly if this is your first time studying a topic such as Abhidharma, it's difficult to do it. So you might wonder how it is that you actually should study. Because one of the things about Abhidharma is you get a lot of detail, very dense detail in the topics like this. And it's even denser when you look at the longer commentaries. And the difficulty is how, when you are first approaching this material, can you actually take it in so it's going to mean something to you. You have to really be able to step back, because if you focus on all the details and you're thinking about the 7 places of consciousness, which one are those? Which realms are that? Why? What is this? 9 places for beings, and then you get these different lists, and you're wondering, what are they? What do they mean? If you're staying too far in the details, you're going to lose the overall picture. So you have to have kind of an idea. You have to look at it in terms of a framework that is going to be able to help it make sense to you. So this is where, in the commentaries like this, it has the topics that kind of help you organize your thought. You can think, oh, okay, we're talking about the 5 places of birth right now, and the 5 different types of wanderers. And so how is it the wanderers work together? What are they? What are the places that they're born, and how do they work? So you kind of think about, this is what we're talking about in general. Then you get to the specifics. The specifics make a little bit of sense. And then when you get to the specifics, you can't just kind of leave it at the words, because if you leave it at the words, it's confusing. We say 7 places for consciousnesses, 9 places for beings. What do we mean? And now we're getting today to the 4 places of consciousness, more places for consciousness. Well, so you have to remember, what is it that we mean by a place of consciousness? So you have to keep your eye on the main point. You have to think about what's really important here. When we say a place for consciousness, what we mean by a place for consciousness is a situation where consciousness is going to be able to continue, where it's going to kind of perpetuate itself. Like if you're growing plants, if you plant something that needs clay soil in sandy soil, it's going to wither and die. If you plant something that needs sandy soil and clay soil, it's going to wither and die. So it's like you have to put the plants that need your sandy soil, they have to go in sandy soil. You plant, it's been so long since I've dealt with plants, I'm going to give the wrong example, but you plant your cactuses in the sandy medium, right? Have I got it right? Cactuses go in sand. If you plant a cactus in a bog, it's going to die, because sand is a place for cactus. If you take your Venus flytrap and put it in sand, it's going to die. It's because sand is not a place for a Venus flytrap, but a bog is. And if you have your painted lady slippers, you leave them in the bog where they are, because that is the only place that they grow. And even if you transplant them, they aren't going to do well. So you have to leave things in the places where plants in the places where they go if they're going to grow, right? It's the same with our consciousness. If our consciousness is going to be able to thrive and grow and propagate itself, it needs to have a place where it can do it. And so that's what, like, the places in the human realms, the first 3 levels of the form realm, the first 3 levels of the formless realm, those are all places where consciousness can do well. And the reason why consciousness can do well there is because it has craving for them. That's why it can do well. It's because of craving. So you have craving for those situations. You have craving for being a human. You don't have craving for being a hell being, right? There's no craving there. You don't want to be there. Everything is just horrible. But when you're human, it's pretty good. And so you think, oh yeah, If I could keep this going, if I only can live a long time, and just give me a few more Amritayusaparamits, But that's craving. So when you have that craving, that's when it's a place that works well with that craving. That's what we mean by a place of consciousness. When we talk about the 9 places for beings, which is those same 7, human, the first 3 levels of the form realm, the first 3 levels of the formless realm, then you add the 4th level, the 4th jhana, the 4th level of formless realm, which has the concept-free absorption. That's kind of an anti-consciousness. And also on the peak of existence, the highest level of the formless realm, you have this absorption and cessation. That's kind of anti-consciousness. So those aren't places for consciousness. But if you forget about consciousness and you're just being, I don't need my consciousness, I can just rest in cessation, or I can rest in the concept-free absorption for as long as I want. They're good places to be sentient beings, so you think. So you have the craving to be there, and because you have the craving to be there, there are places for sentient beings. Okay? So that's the point. It makes it something a place for those people. So that's 2 ways of talking about places for sentient beings or consciousness. And then the sutras also explain 4 other places for consciousness. The 4 places for consciousnesses. You got to plant the ones that need sandy soil and sandy soil, basically. This is what we're saying. So the 4 places for consciousness. It is on the middle of page 221, the 3rd section of these particulars, and it says 2 points. There's the actual and what is not that. So the actual is 4 more places for aggregates that are defiled on their own level. So there are 4 more places for consciousness. So these, and what these are, the 4 aggregates that are defiled on their own level. So we've got 5 aggregates, right? We've got form, feeling, conception, formation, and consciousness. So consciousness can abide in, or can dwell or thrive in the other 4 aggregates. So form is a place for consciousness. Feeling, conception, and formation are all places for consciousness. So as it says in the commentary, there are 4 more places in another manner than the 7 taught in a sutra. Oh, something else to edit there. Sorry. This is one of the things of teaching from your own translation for all of you who were in the class last year. I will notice and comment on things that need editing. That sentence needs an edit. A sutra teaches 4 other places in another manner. And so the places for consciousnesses are approaching form and approaching feeling, conception, and formation. So approaching. So when consciousness approaches form, that means when it's kind of directed towards form and it's acting upon or using or knowing form, or when it's knowing feeling, when it's approaching and acting upon feeling or conception or formation. That's what we mean by approaching here. Their nature is the 4 aggregates. Their nature means the 4 places. Their nature is the 4 aggregates of form and so forth that are defiled and that are on their own level, that is, on the same level of the consciousness. If you have a desire realm consciousness, then the form aggregate, the form, feeling, conception, and formation on desire realm are the place of the consciousness, but those on the 1st, 2nd, or 3rd, or 4th jhana and so forth are not. Also, it has to be defiled. So if you have an undefiled form, feeling, conception, or formation, those are not places for consciousness, because the undefiled is like an antidote for consciousness, right? Because consciousness is kind of defiled. It's what we're trying to, one of the defiled things that we're trying to overcome, generally, defiled consciousness. So undefiled is not a place for consciousness. This is because the undefiled is the antidote for consciousness. When we're the undefiled, we use the undefiled, for example, the wisdom that knows the truth, the 4 noble truths, and so forth. This is an antidote for consciousness, because we're trying to achieve nirvana in the foundation vehicle schools. And it is not logical that one level be the support for another level's consciousness. For example, for all of us in the desire realm, our consciousness can't really, we have no way of approaching the form, feeling, conception, and formation on the levels of the jhanas or in the formless realms. There's no way we can approach them because we haven't got there yet. So it has to be that on your own level. Okay? So levels here, when you see levels in this text, generally what we mean is the levels of the desire realm, the 4 levels of the form or the 4 jhanas, and the 4 levels of the formless. So those are 9 different levels. And there are different ways of classifying them. They're not such a big deal, but they come in later. Not a big deal in this chapter, but they're more important later. But the term does come up. And so what is not that? Consciousness alone is not explained as a place, as it says at the bottom of page 221. So here, in Differentiate the Basis for Staying and What Stays, the teacher says that consciousness, which is that which stays, alone is not explained as a place for consciousness. For example, it's not like not mentioning the king himself. You've got the palace. The palace is the place for the king. The throne is the place for the king. The retinue is the place for the king. But the king is not a place for the king, right? The king is the one who stays on the palace and the throne and those places. But the king wouldn't be mentioned as a place for the king. I'm a place for me. No. Right, I'm sitting on a throne, a kind of too nice a throne for myself, but I'm sitting here on a throne, right? So this throne is a place, not really a place for me. It's a place that I'm put on. But anyways, I better just leave it there. Okay. So we've got, so that's the 4 places for consciousness. So we've had of the places, we've had the 7 places for consciousness. The first one, the desire, 3 levels of form, 3 levels of form, 3 of the 4 of formless. And then we've had the 9 places for beings, not desire, I mean the human and gods and desire. And then we have the 4 places for consciousness. Well, now how do these all intersect? That's what the next one is talking. It's talking, analyzing the 4 possibilities, the 4 places, and the 7 places. So we've had the discussion of the 4 places of consciousness. This means the 4 aggregates other than form. The 7 places of consciousness, which are the humans and gods in the desire realm, the 3 of form and the 3 of formless. So what is the intersection? It talks about it as being 4 possibilities. And here, because you all are have come through Western schooling, or many of you have come through Western schooling. If I talk about 4 possibilities, you might not understand me, but if I talk about a Venn diagram, you'll get it. Right? And if we're going to talk about Venn diagrams, I have to draw a Venn diagram. We can talk about things as having either 3 possibilities or 4 possibilities, right? So we're talking about 4 possibilities here. And we have to, with the vendor, okay, so I have to leave the mic to do the drawing. We've got, this is 7 places of consciousness. Does it show up? Can everyone see it? Excellent. And then we've got 4 places of consciousness, 7 places of consciousness, and 4 places of consciousness. So we've got the things that are in the set of 7 consciousnesses, the things that are in the set of 4 consciousnesses, and then we've got, this is a Venn diagram, so I have to do the shading. Right? Isn't that how they usually do it on Venn diagrams? I mean, I've spent too much time among the Tibetans, I don't remember these things so well. You've got the things that are both, and then you've got the things that are neither. Right? So if we talk about it, we've actually got 4 possibilities. Here's one possibility, is only 7, not 4. Is that the order? It comes up in the other order in the text. Where am I? Included in the 7, but not 4. That's the first one. I'm going to label it A. Right? A. And then we've got the second one, is the 4, but not the 7. I'm going to call that B. Okay? Then the third is those that are both, the intersection of the 2 sets. I'll call that one C. Is my C going to show up here? Close enough. That's C. And then we've got D. So that means that we have 1, 2, 3, 4 possibilities, right? Make sense? So it's basically saying it's a Venn diagram where you have 2 intersecting circles. You can also have, and since some of you are doing other study, another way of thinking about things is in terms of 3 possibilities. So 3 possibilities in a Venn diagram would be more like, I'm going to have to do it down here, sorry. You've got A, B, and C, and it looks a lot like a fried egg. So with the 3 possibilities, you'd have, there's the big set, then you have a subset, and then you have things that are not included in the set, right? So that's that's 3 possibilities. So that's when we talk about these. So this is what we call 4 possibilities, basically a Venn diagram with 2 intersecting circles, and 3 possibilities is a Venn diagram with a circle inside of a larger circle, right? That's pretty clear, right? Now it seems pretty simple when I talk about it like that. So now we have to then think about it. Now the reason why we talk about these, and by the way, in Tibetan, this one is called mushi, mushi, and this one is called musum. Makes sense. So mu basically means like here an alternative or possibility. So when we talk about you've got the question, we have the 7 places for consciousnesses, we have the 4 places of consciousnesses. Well, are they completely separate? Are they just totally separate, or are they the same? Now, the reason why we do this is because when you go through and you look at these possibilities, it's not just a question of doing a mental exercise that means nothing. When you have to look and you have to see, how do they actually work? You have to think about, what is it? What is it not? How do they fit together? And so by considering if things are 4 possibilities or 3 possibilities, or if they're exclusive, when you think about them in that way, then you have to start seeing how well do you understand actually what is being talked about. So before we actually take a look at this, I'll just read the root and we'll say, combined there are 4 alternatives. Right? So combined there are 4 alternatives. So we know that when we take the 7 and the 4, there are 4 alternatives, says Vasubandhu. So what are the 4 alternatives? Well, first that means we have to think about what they are. Well, the first alternative would be something that is the 7, but is not the 4. So we're looking at what here is our category A. Is the 7, but not the 4. So if it's the 7, then we know it's humans and gods in the desire realm, the 3 levels of form, the 3 levels of formless. That's the 7, but is everything in there necessarily? Is there anything in there that's not in the 4 levels of consciousness, or in the other 4 places of consciousness? So the other 4 are what? They're the 4 aggregates of form, feeling, conception, and formation, right? So what among those 4 of form, or what that's not form, feeling, and conception would be in these 7 levels? I don't know if you guys in our webcast audience are having the same blank looks on your face. Maybe you are. You've got to find, so what might have it? Well, if we look at it, so we're talking about some sort of a sentient being. What is the sentient being made up of? 5 aggregates. You can't find anything else, right? So the sentient being is form, feeling, conception, formation, and consciousness. Now, if it's going to be in the 7, but if it's not in the 4, then what does it have to be? Consciousness, right? Because consciousness is the only one that's not in the other, that's not a place of consciousness, as we just went into, right? Now, it has to be in the 7 levels of gods and humans and desire realm gods, first 3 of form and first 3 of formless. So what would be then the 2? It's not the form on these realms, it's not the consciousness. It would have to be the consciousness. The consciousness is not one of the 4, But it can be, it's on these levels. But would it be the consciousness on the lower realms? No. So it would be consciousness, for example, human consciousness would be in this category. Likewise, the aggregate of consciousness for a desire realm gods, or the 3 levels, form realms and 3 levels of formless realm. Make sense? Oh, sort of. Still kind of blank looks. You have to think about it. Okay? And I don't know if you have blank looks out there in TV land. I'm going to guess that you do, but the studio audience has blank looks that everyone else has. Okay, so basically what we're saying, we want something that's in the 7 but not in the 4. Not in the 4. The only thing that's not in the 4 is consciousness, right? If consciousness is in the 7, is in the 7, then it has to be on those levels. Desire, okay. Humans and gods in the desire realm, 3 in form realm, 3 in formless realm. So that's in the 7, but not in the 4. So that's the first alternative. Then you've got the possibility of in the 4, but not in the 7. Well, what's in the 4? We have our 5 aggregates: form, feeling, conception, formation, consciousness. Not consciousness, we've got the other 4. Okay, so it's in those 4. So what form, feeling, conception, formation are not in the 7? Well, that would be like the hells, hungry ghosts, and animals, or on the 4th level of dhyana, or on the peak of existence, the highest of the formless realms, because those are not in the 7. So that is what is the 4, but not the 7. So as I go through it, I'm getting more looks of recognition on the studio audience. I hope that that everyone out there in webcast land is having the same looks on your faces. And then we have the things that are both. So when you have the things that are both, then what is going to be the both? So it's got to be the 4. So that means it has to be, what if it has to be? It has to be what? Form, feeling, conception, formation, right? And I don't have 7 fingers on this hand, I'm not polydactyl, but it has to be in the 7 places. So what is going to be in both the 7 places, and in both the 7 places and in the 4 places? Well, it's going to be your form, your feeling, your conception, formation on one of the 7 levels. So humans and gods of desire realm, counted as 1. The first three levels of the form realm and the first 3 levels of the formless realm, because those are both. Right? So that's both. And then we come to the level of things that are neither. So the level of things that are neither, that would include, when you're doing debate, the standard answer for things that are neither is, if you can't think of anything else, you just say a jug, boomba. Because, yes, a vase or a jug is not one of the 4 places of consciousness. Actually, isn't it? Oh, yes, a jug on the level of the desire realm would actually be one of the places for consciousness because it's a form. Right? So you can't say a jug. So you can't use your standard debate answer just saying a jug. You have to say something else. You have to think, what is not in the 4 places of consciousness? What is not in the 7 places of consciousness? Well, if it's not in the 4 places of consciousness, that means it has to be what? Consciousness, or undefiled. So anything undefiled is neither. Consciousness on levels that are not in the 7, consciousness on levels that are not on the 7 would also be neither. So the undefiled is neither, as is the consciousness in the lower realms, on the 4th level of form, the 4th dhyana, and in the peak of existence. So those 3 things. So let's read the commentary. Now that we've gone through that, this should be easy. Do the 7 include the 4? Do the 4 include the 7, you ask? So how do they overlap, basically? If you examine how they can be combined, there are 4 alternatives. The first alternative included in the 7, but not the 4, this one, is the consciousness in the 7 places. because consciousness is not in the 4 places of consciousness, but on the 7 levels, humans and gods and desire, 3 form, 3 formless, it is in the 7 places. The second alternative, included in the 4 but not in the 7, is the defiled aggregates other than conscious in the 3 lower realms, in the 4th dhyana, and on the peak, right? So this is the 4. 4 but not 7 means like form, feeling, conception, formation in the hells, hungry ghosts, and animals, because those aren't in the 7, or on the 4th level of dhyana, because that's also not included in the 7, or on the 4th level of formless, because that's not included in the 7. And on the peak. The third alternative included in both is the first 4 defiled aggregates in the 7 places. So this is where you've got the form, feeling, conception, formation for desire, realm, gods, and humans, 3 levels of dhyana, and 3 levels of formless. And the fourth alternative included in neither is consciousness in the lower realms, 4th dhyana, and peak, and undefiled dharmas. So undefiled dharmas, that could include your undefiled, the wisdom essentially, the knowledge, the path, or so forth. It can also include space and the 2 cessations. These are not included in these. So these are the undefiled dharmas. Classifying, so now we've come to the third section of here. When we're classifying the wanderers, we've got back. We're now at we had the 3 sections of classifying wanderers who are born, classifying in 3 realms, classifying wanderers in 5. Now we have classifying in the 4 modes of birth. So we have to first know what the modes of birth are. So this has 3 topics: where one enters, the classifications of the mode of birth. The second is what enters, the explanation of the between state. And the third is the manner it goes into the place of birth. So what one enters, the classification of the modes of birth. This is 2 topics: the actual classification and examining which beings have which modes of birth. So what we're talking about is there are 4 basic ways that sentient beings take birth, and which beings take which. That's the idea. So the actual classification says their sentient beings have 4 modes of birth, from egg, etc. So there are 4 modes of birth. Sentient beings can be born in any one of 4 modes. So there means in the 3 realms of samsara, sentient beings can be born in one of 4 ways. Humans, at this time in age, and generally in what we see, seem to mostly be born from the womb. There's birth from egg, like birds and reptiles. There is birth from heat and moisture, which Westerners would have accepted up until about sometime in the late 18th century. But now we say it's a little bit different. We'll talk about that in a moment. And then we have miraculous birth. So these are the 4 modes of birth. There, in those 3 realms, sentient beings are known to have 4 modes of birth. There is birth from the egg, etc., including birth from the womb, birth from warmth and moisture, and miraculous birth. So birth from a womb basically is what we would call, is that what, viviparous? And you're born, not necessarily, yeah, viviparous, something like that. Oviparous would be egg, right? Basically, when you're born from the womb, it's like mammals or marsupials. I guess they're mammals too. You're born live, you got a baby goat, baby fox, baby human, born live, right? Then birth from the egg is a little bit different. Birth from the egg, first the sentient being comes, you've got your chickens, you've got your chicken and your rooster, they do what they do, and then there's the mixture of semen and the ovum, or semen and blood is what they would have thought at this time, in the mother's cloaca, and then a egg forms around, and the egg is then born from the mother, and then there's kind of a second birth when the chick hatches from the egg. So there's kind of a 2-step process there. So that's birth from the egg, right? So the egg comes out of the mother's cloaca in the case of reptiles and birds, if we talk about it in terms of anatomy, I believe. People will correct me, I'm sure. Then we have birth from warmth and moisture. So this is like tadpoles, butterflies, beetles, all those things. Now, at the time, of course, they had not yet they had no way of knowing, or they could have had a way of knowing if they had thought of the experiments, but they had not thought of the experiments. So people just thought, like Europeans did until the 18th century, that bugs and things just kind of spontaneously generated out of warmth and moisture. You've got a piece of rotting flesh and all maggots appear on it. Magic. They just are coming out of the warmth and the moisture in that piece of rotting flesh. Later, we can look at it and we can say, oh, there are other, there's the flies lay their eggs and sperm on it, and then it mixes, and you get the little fly eggs that turn into maggots, and then those grow into, those are the larval stage for more flies. So that's how I would say, having done some scientific research, but in the 4th century, and even before, in the time of the Buddha, when all this came from, because it comes from the sutras, people had not thought to do that sort of experiment. Even so, we can still see a distinction between that and birth from an egg. Birth from an egg, you have that 2-stage process. The egg forms within, there's the conception within the mother's body, and then there's the egg forming, and then the egg is born, and then the chick hatches from the egg, or the lizard hatches from whatever it is hatching from the egg. Okay? So it's a little bit different. So we can still, so even though it may not actually be heat and moisture, I think it's still reasonable to call it a different mode of birth. Because there is something different between, laying eggs and hatching them and making a nice nest for them, as opposed to just sort of squirting your whatever out in the pond water and hoping that it all fertilizes. That's kind of different. Some respect. Anyway, it's different enough that we can call a different mode of birth, even if we think about it on a quasi-scientific level. I'm not going to claim to be a scientist. And then the 4th level is miraculous birth. And this is how beings are born in like the God realms and the hell realms. They just miraculously appear there. So now the question is, what type of birth, which beings have which modes of birth? And so this has 3 points. And the first is, which are possessed by humans and animals? Humans and animals have 4. We always thought that humans only had 1 birth from a womb, but you're wrong. You have to read the Buddhist literature. The Buddhist literature has even more in it than the Bible. If you want begats, the Bible only has a couple of pages of begats. But if you got the begats that appear in the last section, I think it's the 3rd section of the 3rd volume of the Vinaya, there's like 20 pages of begats. But it's different because it's not starting from the first person. It's starting from the first person in the Shakya and the lineage that led up to the Shakya family. Anyways, humans and animals have 4. Which wanderers have how many modes of birth, you ask? Humans and animals can have any of the 4 modes. The elders Shaila and Upashaila, for example, are humans born from eggs. So the story is that 500 merchants were sailing in the ocean. They had a shipwreck. And one of them washed up on the shore, and there was a lovely female crane who bore 2 eggs, and Shaila and Upashaila were born from the 2 eggs, the progeny of the poor sailor who had washed up on the shore. They later became elders in the Buddhist lineage. So they're humans born from eggs. So these are the sort of stories. This is, again, we're talking about the level distinguishing between myth and reality and so forth is interesting. For the people of the Buddhist time and the people who are reading this in the 4th century, there's no reason to doubt the story as being true, just something that happened. For us, it's like, no way this could have happened. So how do we deal with that? We will punt it today. We will not worry about it today. Present humans are born from the womb. Mandatar, Amrapali, and so forth are born from the warmth and moisture. So Mandatar, his name means, let me nurse him. So Mandatar, his father was a king, and a big boil appeared on the king's head, and then it popped open, and there was this really beautiful little boy, little baby boy. And he was so beautiful that all of the wet nurses said, let me nurse him, let me nurse him. And so that's how he got to be named Mandatar, which means let me nurse him, basically. Amrapali and so forth, these are other beings born in the same way. Okay, and humans of the first Jnana and noble Aryadeva have miraculous births. So when the world first formed and humans first populate the human realm, the first humans are born miraculously by the force of karma, according to the teachings that we come to. And noble Aryadeva, the student of Nagarjuna, is also known to have been born miraculously. We could also add Padmasambhava, according to the Tibetan histories, right? So these are stories in the Buddhist literature of people who have these miraculous births and so forth. The three of the modes of birth for animals are easy to understand. So heat and moisture, frogs and such, eggs, birds and reptiles, womb is mammals and marsupials, right? And then some nagas and garudas, for example, are born by miraculous birth. So that's fairly easy for the animals. So basically nagas and garudas, some of them are born miraculously. Okay. So which are possessed by hell beings, gods, and so forth? Hell beings have miraculous birth. So in general, miraculous birth is pretty good, but not if you're going to be reborn in hell. Miraculous birth means basically that you're born fully formed in an instant without going through some sort of gestational development period and, it's just, boom, you're formed. Okay? As do gods in the between states. So when you're born a god, you form, we'll get to this later. It talks about the birth of gods later on in the chapter. So hell beings have miraculous birth only, as do gods and beings in the between state. So when you die and you pass into the between state, that is the bardo state, we usually call it in the Tibetan tradition, then at that point you have the, that you're miraculously born there. And which are possessed by hungry ghosts. From the womb as well are hungry ghosts. The word as well in the verse means not only from the womb, but also but generally generally they're born by miraculous birth, but sometimes they're born from the womb. Most hungry ghosts are born by miraculous birth, but from the womb as well are some hungry ghosts born. The reason why we say that it's some is there was a female ghost who, the story is that Madhgalyayana went to the hungry ghost realm and had a conversation with this ghost, and she said, I bear 5 children, I have 5 children every night and 5 children every day. I eat all of them and I'm still hungry. So that's proof that there are hungry ghosts who are born from the womb. But when you think about it, the poor hungry ghost is eating her own children and still not being able to satisfy her hunger. So among all the modes of birth, miraculous birth is the best, but the teacher demonstrated birth from the womb in order not to fulfill the predictions of the non-Buddhists who had prophesied that a magician would appear and deceive the world. So when you say, okay, miraculous birth is the best type of birth, well, the Bodhisattva who was about to take his last existence, he was the best of all sentient beings. Why would he choose a lesser form of birth? That's the question. Why would the Buddha bother to take birth in a womb when that's the worst type, when that's a lesser type of birth? He could have been born miraculously. There are several reasons. The main reason was because there were non-Buddhist teachers who had prophesied that there would be a magician or a demon who would appear miraculously and deceive the world. And so in order that people could not say that of him, he took birth from the womb. So that's one reason. The second reason, which will come up later, is that when you are born miraculously, you also die miraculously, which means you don't leave any remains. And had the Buddha been born miraculously, he would not have been, had the Bodhisattva been born miraculously, the Buddha would not have been able to leave any relics for us. He also took birth from his womb in order to bring his Shakya and kinsfolk into the Dharma and to leave relics of his body. So by taking birth as in the Shakya clan, he was able to bring the Shakyas into the Dharma. Okay. So now here in terms of the discussion of classifying the 4 modes of birth that we've talked about, the first of the 3 topics, where one enters the classification of the modes of the birth, we've got these 4 modes of birth. So what takes birth? What enters? The explanation of the between state. So what enters and what enters the world is the between state. So this has 2 points, the essence and proof, and then the second is distinctions of bodily form and so forth. So the essence and proof. There's 3 topics, the essence, dispelling doubts, and the proof. So the essence, it reads here, in this it is that which arises between the states of birth and death. In this means here, in the 3 realms of samsara. It is that which arises between the states of death and birth. So we've got 4 states. We mentioned them the other day. We've got the state of death, then we've got the between state, or bardo. When I redo this translation, I'll probably change from between state to bardo state, because everyone knows the word bardo. And then there is the word birth, or then there's the state of birth, which is the moment of taking birth, and then you've got the previous state, which we mentioned yesterday. The previous state is called previous because it's previous to birth. We'll get to that one in a day or two as well. What is the essence of the between state, you ask? In this here, it is that continuum of the 5 defiled aggregates which arises between the cessation of the preceding state of death and the upcoming state of birth. So when you pass away, the continuum of your 5 aggregates does not cease. There is the continuum as it continues from the moment of death through the interim period until you are reborn is the between state or the bardo state. Okay, so there's this period. And the reason why it is called the between state, it said this is not actually yet taking birth. It hasn't fully taken birth. So the dispelling doubts, it has not reached its destination, so the between state is not born. So the bardo sentient being has not really fully developed yet. It's like out of one, going towards the other, but not really there, so we wouldn't say that it's completely born or completely arisen at that point. So what is the reason that it has arisen but not born, you ask? So it's happened, it's arising, but it's not yet born. Why do we say that? Because it has not reached its destination, the previous state with complete name and form and all the actual sense bases propelled by karma. So the between state is not born. So when you say something is, so basically what we're saying is that the moment you die, your karma is propelling into your next, like if you have the karma to be reborn as an animal, the moment you die, you enter the between state heading for the animal realm. You are not a wanderer yet, right? You're heading there. You haven't got to your destination yet. When you get there, then there also is all the completing karma that helps you form the other aspects. You've got your consciousness at the moment of birth, and then name and form, and then the sixth sense basis, the internal sensory faculties and the mental faculty, right? So those 6 sense bases, when they are all formed, then at that point we say, okay, then you've reached it, then you've reached that destination. So you have to have both the propulsion that gets you moved, that's moving you in that direction, and the completing factors that mean that you actually complete it. So that's something that comes up in the teachings on karma. We've got propelling karma and completing karma, and that is what is being discussed here. Complete here, complete name and form, means that it's completed by the completing karma. So that's what we're talking about. But this is the idea of the between state. When we talk about the between state or the bardo state in the Tibetan tradition, we usually talk about it in terms of the tantric teachings on the bardo state. But it's also something that's found in the sutras. The teachings in the Abhidharma all come from the sutras, right? So here, when you talk about the between state, then we're saying that basically this is the bardo state, but taught from the perspective of the sutras. So here in the sutras, it's different than the teaching in the tantras, where there's a lot of detail about the experiences that sentient beings have, the different visions that they have, the stages of it, different types of light and paths and so forth. Many of you may have read teachings on the bardo. These are generally from the tantric perspective. The sutra perspective doesn't go into such detail. It doesn't deny that those things happen or not. It doesn't say anything about it. It says nothing about peaceful or wrathful deities, yea or nay. So it's a kind of simpler position, but it's saying that basically it takes some time from a being from the moment of death until the moment of the next rebirth. There's an interval. But not all Buddhist schools accept it. For example, in present-day Buddhism, I believe that the Theravada school generally does not accept the between state. Now, someone might correct me on that one. But there, in the time of the Buddha, at the time of Vasubandhu, there certainly were schools that did not accept the bardo state. So, and generally, in the northern traditions of Buddhism, we do except the between or bardo state. So for that reason, because it's not accepted by everyone, by all Buddhists, then we have to have proof. So that's the third section. The proof is, it has two parts, the logical proofs and the scriptural proofs. And so we'll go through the logical proofs this afternoon. The logical proofs, section A, this has three topics: the actual proof, teaching that the example is illogical, and the third is proving the reason for that. So the actual proof, analogous to a grain's continuum, it is not born from interruption. Here, when we say interruption, it's basically saying that there's no gap. You can't have like a gap in space or time. That the continuum of the five aggregates has to continue, has to go on somehow. So the Buddha Mahasangaka and Mahishashika schools say that the birth state only happens immediately following the state of birth, so there is no between state. This is the opponent's position. So the idea is that in one instant you're born, or you die in one realm, and then in the next instant, like right away, you're born in the next realm. So you could die in this world, and if your karma is to be born on some exoplanet that they have recently discovered, then in the next instant you're right over there. You're reborn there. If your karma is to be born, is to die here and be reborn in the hells, it's just an instant, just right away. 1 second here, the very next, or 1 nanosecond here, the next nanosecond in the next realm, just immediately. And there are, I believe, some Theravada descriptions that talk about it like this, just immediately being reborn. That's the opponent's position. But here we're talking about it from the perspective of the Great Exposition School, or that is the Sarvastivada school. And the form of the birth state and desire and form is similar to a grain of seed, from which a shoot, from which a trunk, from which so forth arise in an uninterrupted continuum. It is analogous to a grain's continuum and to the result of that continuum. So here Vasubandhu is proving it by analogy, which is a common form of proof in Indian logic. So it's like a grain's continuum. So you have a grain, let's say a grain of rice. You plant a grain of rice. It has a little shoot. It grows the stalk. I should say stalk instead of trunk here. And then that trunk will have flowers, and then those will ripen, and there'll be grain. That grain will be collected. Some of it will be cooked. Some of it will be taken somewhere else and planted in another field later. And that grows and makes another grain, another stalk, more grains, and they're carried over. So it's like that same continuum. In the same way, the continuum of the five aggregates, you take birth here, you go through this lifetime, and at the end of this lifetime, that continuum of the five aggregates then goes through the between state to wherever it's propelled by its karma, and then all the completing factors come together, and it takes birth in that new place, and then that continuum of the five aggregates goes on, goes through that lifetime until the moment of death, and then so on to the next state. So that's the analogy. So analogous to a grain's continuum and to the results of that continuum. So like the grain produces the stalk, the shoot, the stalk, the flowers, that produces new grains, the result, the fruit. They then make the next, and so forth. Therefore, because the essence of the continuum of existence arises in a different place, it is not born solely from the continuation of a state of death that has been interrupted. So interrupted again means that there's a gap, like some distance or something, either distance or time, where there's nothing, no link in between. There has to be something. Basically, it's saying there has to be something to get from here to there. And this is a result reason of prior cause, where the reason and the example are taught simultaneously. So when you talk about a result reason, generally in Tibetan, Indian and Tibetan logic, we talk about three different types of reasons: a reason of result, a reason of identity, and a reason of non-observation. Result, identity, and non-observation. Here we're talking about a result, because when you see a result, then you know that its cause had to have come before. For example, when you see a rice plant, you know that there had to have been a rice seed before it. Otherwise, that plant could not happen. So the proof of the rice plant proves the prior existence of the grain of rice. The grain of rice does not necessarily prove the future existence of the plant, because that grain of rice could be cooked and eaten. So the result proves that the cause came beforehand. That's what we're saying here. And the analogy is the analogy of the grain. Teaching that the example is illogical. So the example here is not the example of the grain, but an example provided by the opponents, my Samgika and my Shashka schools. And they say, since a reflection is, or here it says, Vasubandhu says, since a reflection is not proven nor similar, it's not an example. So it's kind of explained here in the commentary. I'll read it in the commentary. Well, one does see instances where the cause's continuum is interrupted, but the result arises. In other words, where there's an interruption or a gap between the cause and the result. For example, the reflection of a face in a mirror that appears in a mirror is a result of that face, but it arises even though it is interrupted in space. So there's a distance between the mirror where the reflection that is a result happens and the face. So it's possible for there to be a gap in space between the cause, which is here, and the result, which is over what you're looking at. So it arises even though it's interrupted in space. For this reason, the birth state also arises from the interrupted state of birth, you say. This is the opponent saying it. So just as you can have a reflection in a mirror with a gap in space, so you can also have a gap in space when you have the rebirth, they say. And Vasubandhu says this is not so because the reflection is not proven to be a form, nor similar. It actually should be or similar. Sorry, grammar. Or similar. It's not so since the reflection is not proven to be a form. What this is saying is that if something is going to be a form, then it's what? It's made out of particles. So you've got your mirror. And on your mirror, appearing in your mirror, there is a reflection of your face. So when your face is reflecting in your mirror, is your face actually a separate form than that mirror? There are no particles of a face in that mirror. There couldn't be particles of a face in that mirror because that mirror is made up of particles of its own. Right? So it's the causes and conditions that make the appearances in the mirror look like your face, but it is not your face. If you ever tried, when you're shaving in the morning, for those guys who shave, when you're shaving in the morning, you don't put your shaving cream on the mirror, do you? You don't try to shave the mirror. You shave your face. If you try to shave your mirror, it's not going to do anything to your stubble, right? Nor are you even going to be able to shave the reflection of the stubble on the reflection because there's no stubble. You see the stubble in the reflection, but there's no stubble there. You can't do it because there's no thing there. There's no separate thing, right? So that's what he's saying here. The reflection is not a separate thing. It appears there because of the power of that particular object of a mirror has a particular type of power that when the conditions are right, it's able to produce a reflection. Vasubandhu says in the auto commentary, it's like a magnet that can pick up metal but not wood, pick up iron but not wood, right? A magnet has a particular power to do that. Similarly, a mirror has the particular capacity to produce a reflection. Then it says that the word nor includes the alternatives. So there are alternatives. Even if you say that the reflection were a real thing, were proven to be a form, because it is not similar to an actual form, it is not suitable to be given as an example. So here, when you have a being passing away in this realm, they pass away in this realm, the 5 aggregates of this realm. Say you're being born from here in the human class, and then you're going to be reborn as an animal. You die as a human, and then your karma propels you to be reborn as a squid. And when you're going there to be reborn as a squid, your human aggregates have passed away. You've got the aggregates of a squid, but you haven't quite fully formed there. It takes, there are separate aggregates. At any rate, that squid, this 5 aggregates of squid, and the 5 aggregates of the human are separate aggregates. But the mirror, the form on the mirror is not a separate form. That's why you can't shave the face in the mirror. So you shave the face here, not the one in the mirror, right? Because that's not a thing. So it's different with the example, because the example is showing something that's not an independent thing, whereas independent. This is terrible words to use. It's not a separate thing. When you have the one existence and the next existence, then they're separate things. They're clearly separate. They're different classes. Like one is a god and one is a human and one is a squid, or whatever it is. They're different things. Or even if you're going to be reborn as a human, in that unlikely possibility is reborn as one human and reborn as a different human, different, right? So they're different things. And that's not the same. So therefore, you can't use the mirror as an example. I'm going to go just a little bit further. Or should I? Yeah, I should go just a little bit further today. So now, when we talk about the reasons for the proof, you've got, here we're talking about it in terms of the logical proof. So we want to discuss these reasons in more deity. So on one, no two are simultaneous. So this means when you have one obstructive form, you can't have two obstructive forms in one place at the same time. On the object of a mirror, the color of the mirror and the color of the reflection do not both arise simultaneously at one time, because on one object, no two obstructive forms of similar type are able to arise simultaneously. So what this is saying, like you have a mirror. If you look at the mirror from the side, you can see the mirror and you can see the form of the mirror, but you don't really see much of a reflection if you're looking at it from the side, right? Now, if you go to the right place, then you can see your reflection on it. But at that point, you're seeing your reflection, you're not actually seeing the mirror, sort of. It's not like this is a separate thing. It's not, you don't have both of them, both forms showing at the same time. It's not like there's not a separate obstructive form for your face and for the reflection of your face, and not a separate obstructive form for the mirror. It's the same form. Looking at it from different ways, you see the same form in different ways because of different causes and conditions. But it's actually the same form. It just appears differently because of the conditions of the light and reflection and so forth. So reflection is not an obstructive thing, but it is not logical for it to be any other type of thing either. So if it's not going to be an obstructive thing, then what would it be? Well, it's not consciousness. It's not a mental factor. It's not a non-concurrent formation. It's not non-composite because it arises from causes and conditions. What else could it be? It can't be anything other than form, and form is obstructive by its nature. So it has to be form, but it's not obstructive. So that just means that it's not a separate type of form, it's just a different appearance of that mirror, on that mirror, the surface of the mirror appearing in a different way. If it were, the mirror would not be necessary as a support for the reflection. So if the reflection were its own sort of thing, then you wouldn't have to have the mirror there. It would have to be, you'd be able to find it separately. But you cannot see the reflection independent of the mirror. You have to have the mirror to have the reflection. And if you have to have the mirror, if the reflection is always observed with a mirror, then it has to be, it can't be separate from that mirror. So it's not a separate obstructive form. So the prince, the prince means the common Yashomitra. Prince actually maybe should be Jinaputra. It could be explained as the same words as the Bodhisattva. For some reason, when I translated this, I thought I'd seen someplace a story that he had been an actual prince, and that's why I translated it that way. But I'm not certain about that now. I would need to research that again. Therefore, the state of birth is the continuum of the state of death, but a reflection is not the same with respect to form. So when you have the state of birth, you die, and then there's a state of birth that's happening in a continuum of the same 5 aggregates, but the reflection is not the same because the reflection is different than the aggregates of your body. So the example of reflection is not proof. The example of the essence that arises later in a grain's continuum is something that has its own continuum, and thus it is a compatible example. So the difference here between the two analogies is that when you have the face and the reflection is one continuum, part of the mirror is continuum, and your face is the other continuum. The reflection stops, but your face continues. Whereas if you have a grain that then grows into a shoot and a stalk and flowers and so forth, that is going to, the grain is gone by the time the stalk is there. And then when the next grain is planted, the first stalk is gone. So it's a continuum. It's different. A single continuum as opposed to multiple continuums. So that's the next one. And then the proof that the example and the meaning, the analogy, the mirror, that is, and the meaning are dissimilar. It's discontinuous, born from two. So it's discontinuous, you could say it's like there's a gap. Then the reflection of a face's form is, in the mirror, is discontinuous from the face's form. So there's a gap between the two, because the reflection is connected by the continuum of the mirror, connected to the continuum of the mirror, and arises simultaneously as the face's form. So you've got the form of the face as one continuum, you've got the form of the mirror as a different continuum. They're separate continuums. The reflection is born from the two principal conditions of the mirror and the face. But the state of birth is different. It's not. There's not two separate causes. It's that one continuum that one continuum that comes out of the state, continuum of the five aggregates that comes from the state of death. But here, the state of birth is not born from two causes, a state in death and some other cause. It's just the state of death, because no principal cause other than the state of death can be observed. Now, the state of death involves all five aggregates at the time of death. The primary cause of the state of death cannot be the semen blood, the state of birth cannot be the semen blood, and so forth. So you might think that, well, the cause of birth is the mother and father's semen and blood, or the semen and ovum in modern terms, because that's what leads to it. But that can't be the case for all births, because there's a miraculous birth where you don't have that continuum. Because miraculous birth arises in space, from space without any semen or blood. You just miraculously appear. Okay, so that is enough for today's talk. We will leave it here, and we will recite the dedication of merit. Osanam de tam jesebani Tomne nye pedranam pamchene Gegana chibalam trumbai Sibetso